Dressing a lady in the 18th century was a rather involved affair. Informal clothing, let alone fully dressed, required several layers. Whilst there are many different types of 18th century women's gowns, today we look at a style of dress called Robe à la Francaise, also known as a sack-back gown. This is a recognisable iconic gown worn over side hoops or panniers, and with a back sporting box pleats which fell from the shoulder to the hem. Gowns of this type would be made from fabrics such as silks, satins and brocades, and often featured layers of lace and adornments of ribbons, braidwork or embroidery. The recognisable robe à la Francaise is a development from the earlier informal, much more loose style based on the robe bâton, which is said to be a favourite for one who wishes to remain stylish whilst perhaps hiding a clandestine pregnancy. Let's have a look at the layers that go into being fully dressed. As you can see, our lady is wearing a chemise as an underlayer for modesty and as a base layer for the clothing. She now puts her stockings on and keeps them in place with ribbon garters. Stockings could be made from fabrics including silk, cotton, wool and linen, and were seamed or gored. This was to get a better fit for the heel and ankle. Sometimes stockings, like these here, had patterns known as clocks knitted or embroidered, which, aside from being decorative, could help to reinforce sewn edges of the stocking seams. Next are the shoes. Whilst we often put shoes on last, putting stockings and shoes on prior to stays or the corset is often more comfortable. Ladies' shoes could be leather with buckles, fittings, fabric and ribbons. The red heel was an important status symbol showing that you were in favour with the royal court. Now we move on to stays. Stays are the 18th century term for corset and are not seen as just underwear but more an underbodice. Stays trim the waist but were not designed to make it tiny. The illusion was created by the shaping and design of the dress and having the hips look wider through padding or panniers. Stays helped shape the body and support the gown. Made from various material including silk, silk brocade, stiffened linen and with boning of whalebone, reed or wood bents, there were different lacing designs, but most are laced at the back, using one long lace to effectively sew the two sides together through offset eyelets. The tabs of the stays are important as they allow the boning and shaping to stretch past the waist, stopping the end of the stays from digging into the hip or collapsing into the waist, and also forming a sort of pressure release as the tabs spread apart with the position of the stays. Even with a chemise on, stays also often had a light lining tacked in which could be replaced as needed. Eighteenth century dressing often included various petticoats in varying fabrics from linen, cotton to expensive silks. Next, the pockets are applied. Pockets were standalone items usually consisting of two individual cloth pockets held together on a ribbon waistband. Pockets were often given as gifts and could be made to match petticoats or dresses, embroidered, made from remnants of favourite fabric, or bought from dressmakers and haberdashers. They were useful for keeping all manner of items from pocketbooks, money, thimbles and sewing accoutrements, handkerchiefs, snuff, trinket and perfume boxes, and even hidden food supplies. Over this are laid the panniers, designed to give the illusion of a wider hip and thus a smaller waist. Panniers could be quite wide, some causing ladies to need to turn sideways to access doors, and sharing a couch at an evening function was difficult to say the least. The panniers often had cutouts to allow ladies to put their hands through to reach their pockets beneath. Next came the underskirt, parts of which would be visible and could sometimes have embroidery, metallic lacing or ribbons for decoration. They were usually drawstring tied and had openings in so that a lady could reach inside the skirts and layers of the underpinnings to reach the pockets tied around her waist. Finally, we move on to the main gown, which in this case has a stomacher. often a small stiffened decorative piece for the dress to lace over or pin to, forming a V in shape and adding to the small waist and wider hip illusion. The dress is laced, clipped or pinned and lays over all the underpinnings. The robe often has decorations and in this case has little lace pinnings at the sleeves. It is not unknown to retain the robe and then completely alter the look by removing and renewing different decorations, lace and ribbons to showcase a new look. And here you can see the iconic box pleats on the back. Now we move on to finishing the look. For decades, the desired and popular complexion across Europe was to look pale-skinned as possible, as it denoted idleness and wealth, as only those who toiled in fields and outside would pick up a tan. In the 17th and 18th centuries, this was more greatly pronounced, with both men and women resorting to makeup to create the perfect pale complexion. Importantly, however, the makeup should look as naturally white as possible, rather than clearly painting your face white. The idea is to give the illusion of incredibly pale skin and make people believe it is yours, not a layer of makeup. There were various chemical washes and bleaches to lighten the skin, but most turned to foundations and powders. Some were harmless, including rice powders, but most still included lead, which as we know is poisonous, and most 18th century socialites also knew this, yet they decided to continue its use despite the risks. The white makeup was not complete without a liberal amount of rouge on the cheeks and sometimes onto the earlobes. Some were harmless mixes of madder, safflower and other vegetable matter. But again, the most favoured cosmetic rouge was made of vermilion, often using cinnabar, also known as mercury sulfide. The difficulty with both white powder and creams and the rouge is that they are hard to gain a full coverage. It could often be patchy and react to the wearer's skin and temperature. They could often run or melt in the case of creams, or dry the skin in the case of powders and rouge. The ideal 18th century eyebrow was curved, thin and very dark. These could be darkened with coal, lead, oil lamp soot, lamp black, or via burnt cloves or cork. Those who had lost their eyebrows through plucking could use false eyebrows made of mouse skin. Lips again had a layer of rouge, usually using the same rouge pigments as the cheeks, but adding beeswax to create a lip cream. Dark beauty patches were made of velvet, taffeta or satin and glued to the skin. They served to hide blemishes and scars, but also helped the paleness of the skin stand out. They also took on a language all of their own. The position of the beauty spot could signify your mood or even your political allegiance. Wigs seemed to be synonymous with the 18th century, but it was mainly men who wore full wigs. Women were expected to use their own hair and add extensions, padding, ornaments and powders, but did not often wear full wigs. The powdered wig was also not as white as you are led to believe. The white-haired wigs were quite rare and expensive, and therefore sought after, so powders were used to emulate this, but they often didn't create a pure white, more of a grey or lightened blonde dependent on the original base colour to begin with. Hair was usually curled, waved or frizzed, and then pinned into various heights and curls using pins, padding and ornamentation. By the 1770s, height and volume became the rage, and additional paddings, feathers, pearls and even large ornaments and objects were built into the hair. For a day-to-day look, however, height and simple curls with a pretty ornamentation and powdering would suffice. Use of powder started to diminish across Europe with the prevalence of the natural look, but the English, who hadn't fully adopted it early on in the 18th century, were fully embracing the use of hair powder, so much so that it was taxed in 1795 and successfully helped finance various government programmes including wars in France. And here you have your fully dressed 18th century lady.